Now that you've seen the steps that can be followed to get started using the canvas, let's go ahead and put those steps into action and do a demonstration. To demonstrate using the canvas, I've created a simple HTML5 document that you can see here, and I'm going to follow the steps that I outlined in the previous section of this module. So step 1 was we need to define the canvas element. So let's go ahead and add some comments along the way. And that's one of the easier steps to perform. So we'll simply define a canvas, we'll give it an ID, we'll call it my canvas. Let's give it a width of say 600, a height of 400. And if we run it at this point, you won't be real impressed because it's going to blend right in with the page. You can't really see the dimensions, but actually it should be right around in this area. Now to make it visible, it's pretty easy. We can actually just add a style. And we can do, in this case, a light gray. Let's run it again. And now we can actually visualize the height and the width of the canvas. Makes it a little bit easier to work with, especially when you're just getting started and want to play around. Step 2 is all JavaScript. In fact, pretty much everything you'll do after defining the canvas element is involving JavaScript. So I'm going to come up into the head section. Let's add a script. And with that script, we'll come on in, and I need to handle accessing the canvas, getting to the context, and rendering, but I can't do that until the canvas is loaded up in the DOM. So if you're using jQuery or some other library, you could handle the DOM content ready, but I'm going to do just window onload, and we'll assign that to a function that will get called when it loads. So in here, we now need to go to step 2, which is find the canvas. Step 3 is going to be access the 2D context. And then step 4 is going to be render some graphics. So to actually find the canvas is very simple. We can use document get element by ID. So we'll make a canvas variable. And we'll grab our my canvas ID and paste it in. And that's pretty easy. So step 1 is now taken care of. Now step 2 is also very simple. We can define a variable. I usually call it CTX for context. And we'll now take our canvas object and we'll say get context. Now we can't just pass empty parentheses. We need to say what context, and we want the 2D context. Now it's really important, and I mentioned this earlier, that you leave it lowercase. I've accidentally slipped in an uppercase, and you'll spend a little bit of time debugging, thinking something else is wrong with your code. And all it was you didn't case it properly. So case does matter. Make sure you do a lowercase there. And that's it. We're ready to go. So now we can use this context, and I like to think of this as the pen or the brush if you're a painter or an illustrator that you want to work with. And so now that we have the pen or the brush, we can now use it to render and draw to the canvas. So I'm just going to render a very simple shape. We're going to do a very hello world type of example. I'm going to render a rectangle, and then we'll render an ellipse. So to render a rectangle is pretty simple. We can say context dot fill rect and give it the X and Y starting position. Now when we run this, let me comment this out and run it one more time. The canvas XY position starts up here in the left corner, just like most screens. So 0, 0 is up in this area. And then obviously down in here we'd be at a width of 600 and 400 in that approximate area. So what I need to do is say, where do I want this rectangle to be rendered in the overall canvas? Now if we want it up in the left corner, we can do 0, 0. If we wanted it somewhere near the middle, then we could do something like 300, 200. And now we need to say what's the width of it. Let's say that we want 200 on the width and we want 100 on the height. So if we were to document this, we have the X, the Y, the width, and the height. And that's what we're doing. Now if we run this, we didn't tell it what color, but let's see what happens, and you'll see we get a default color. So you can see it defaulted to black. Fortunately, it's very, very simple to actually control what type of color we want to show. And we can do that. If you think of a painter, they would dip their brush into some color and then paint with it. Well, we can dip our context by calling fill style and giving it a color. So let's go ahead and give it a color of, say, green. What that'll do now is now the brush is green, and pretty much everything we do from here on out will be green. So let's come up to run, we'll launch it, and now it should change to green, and you can see we've now rendered a simple rectangle. Alright, now the last thing I'm going to do for this Hello World demo is let's do an ellipse. Now if you've used other graphics APIs such as GDI Plus or Flash or something else, you might expect you'd have something like a fill ellipse or maybe a fill circle or something simple like that, and it's actually not the case. It's called arc. Now what arc does is it makes us define several different things. The first is we need to go in and actually define X and Y points. So let's do, let's go down to say 100 and 100, and that's our X and Y. So I'm just going to add a comment above this. So we'll say X, Y. The next thing we're going to add is what's the radius of the actual circle. Then we do the start angle, the end angle, and then do we want it to be clockwise or anti-clockwise? So I'll just put anti-clockwise. Alright, so in this example we're just going to do a simple radius of around 50. Now we need to give it a start angle. Now I'm going to start at 0 and I'm going to go all the way around. So we're going to do 2 times math.pi, and that'll make a complete circle and really make an ellipse, a circle that's complete. And then for anti-clockwise, we're going to say no, just do it normal. It won't matter in this case, actually. Now, if we run this, you won't be real impressed because you're not going to see it. You'll notice it should be up in here somewhere, and there's nothing to be found. The reason for that is we never actually told it that we want to fill it. So all we have to do to finish the arc is say fill. It's pretty easy to forget that actually, because with fill rect, it does all that in one step, but there is no such thing as fill arc. So we actually have to make an arc and then fill it. Now, what color is it going to use? Well, currently our brush is dipped in green, so the rect is going to be in green, the rectangle, and the arc is going to be green. So let's go ahead and run this. And there we go. We now have our simple circle or ellipse, and we have our rectangle. Now it's really easy again to change the color of this. We can come in, and if you don't change it, the brush just basically stays green, and so everything you render on the screen is green. But we can follow the same principle, and let's say we want navy. Now we'll go ahead and run it, and we'll get a navy circle up here with our green rectangle. So that's our Hello World example that follows the steps that I outlined earlier. We define the canvas, giving it an ID with a width and a height, and then I set the background color just so we can see it a little bit better. You certainly don't have to do that. From there, we went in and found the canvas. We accessed the 2D context, which, as I mentioned, I like to think of as the brush. We set the brush to green. We fill a rectangle, giving it where to start on the XY coordinate system and the width and the height. We change the brush to navy, and then from there we draw an arc, saying that we want it to be 50 as far as the radius goes. Now obviously if we want a bigger one, we can simply increase the radius if we'd like. From there we call fill, and that's it. From there the canvas takes over, and this now renders those pixels to the screen. So that's a wrap on this Hello World demo that shows how to get started using the HTML5 canvas.